I'm John Heilemann.
And I'm Mark Halperin. And with all due respect to Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, save it for the convention, fellas. This is going to be the Kathleen Turner episode. Trust me, we'll get to that Trump-Cruz stuff in a moment. But first, we have new numbers from our latest Bloomberg Politics national poll. Our big findings, the two candidates who probably see the most good news in this survey are also the two candidates that are least likely at this point to become their party's nominees. That is Bernie Sanders and John Kasich. On the Democratic side, despite his delegate deficit, Sanders has closed the polling gap with Clinton. They're now basically in a statistical tie nationally. In general election matchups, Clinton beats Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, but she loses to John Kasich 47% to 43%. Sanders, like Clinton, beats Trump and Cruz in a hypothetical general election contest. But unlike Clinton, Sanders actually beats Kasich too, 46% to 44%. And yet, both Sanders and Kasich are getting pressured to drop out of the race. John, Sanders and Kasich regularly out on the stump say to voters, I win these head-to-heads, I'm the most electable. Why isn't that argument breaking through?
I think mainly because, and this episode is going to be a dream for you, because I'm going to speak as little as possible because my voice is gone. But I will say that I think electability is an argument that does not resonate that much with voters in the end. They all say they want an electable nominee, but in the end, what they care more about is, can the people get things done? Or what are their values? What's their ideology? What are their positions on issues that voters care about? Not about the abstract question of who's going to win in the fall. Voters rightly see that as something this is a 50-50 country. Whoever the nominee is likely to be electable.
Yeah, it does still beg the question of why Clinton is doing worse than Sanders. You know, I also wonder why Kasich is doing so well. I wonder if it's because people know about him and like the fact that he's got a record in Ohio that they look on favorably, or is it simply because he's not Cruz and Trump and that's helping him? Same with Sanders, though. You know, I wonder why Sanders against Kasich, is doing better. It's a strange thing. Electability, you're right, doesn't matter to much to voters. But I do think as we get down to it here, and particularly if on the Republican side, if Kasich can fight to the convention, electability at the convention might matter. If Trump hasn't improved his standing, if Cruz hasn't improved his standing, and Kasich can somehow get himself to the convention in a position to be the nominee, I think electability will matter to those voters.
Well, it certainly will matter to those voters.
Delegates.
To matter to the delegates, and being able to refer to polls like that, will be important. If Bernie Sanders, for instance, closed the pledged delegate gap against Hillary Clinton, it would be super delegates in the Democratic Party basically have one reason to stay with someone and to vote against someone who has the pledged delegate lead, and that is that they're unelectable. They're McGovern. If Sanders can point to polls that say that he would beat any Republican, and do better than Hillary Clinton, super delegates might be more inclined to stick to make the switch.
Pretty good achievement in some ways for those two guys to be ahead the way they are. All right. But wait, there's more. In that same Bloomberg Politics national poll, we asked likely general election voters about a topic that has been a big part of this campaign, international trade. Turns out that both Republicans and Democrats, not big fans. When asked if they think the U.S. should have more or fewer restrictions on imported foreign goods, there was bipartisan agreement. 67% of Republicans said there should be more restrictions. 66% of Democrats said the same. John, it is rare in any polling question to find Democrats and Republicans thinking the same way. Right. They do on this. What are the general election implications of this bipartisan consensus on trade?
Well, the first is that it's likely that whoever the Republican nominee is, most likely Donald Trump, but anyone else, is going to be the first Republican general election candidate in a long time who is not a staunch free trader. And on the other side, it means that Hillary Clinton, who's moved to the left on trade to cover her flank, is going to be forced to stick with those positions, which a lot of people have doubts in her heart that she's not, in fact, a free trader, too. So you're going to have basically a more or less protectionist argument going on between both parties. Never seen that before in our lifetime in politics.
Yeah. Look, there are other Republicans who are restrictionists on trade. Trump is out of step with the leadership and the elites of his party, not just on trade, but on things like a temporary ban on Muslim immigration, etc. Kasich and Cruz are both free traders. Kasich in a more consistent way. Cruz is somewhat inconsistent way. I think, we've never had a general election between two people who are moving towards the protectionist side. We might. If it's Trump versus Clinton, we will have two people who have questioned the current trade deals that are on the table.
Or if it's Trump versus Sanders. Look, I mean, these battles for white working class voters, if that's where a lot of the action is going to be, again, especially if Trump is the nominee, Hillary Clinton is not going to be able to move an inch away from her now newly hatched opposition to TPP and other matters.
Yeah, on the assumption, as many Republicans who are hopeful that if Trump's the nominee, that he will start to modulate his positions to more electable positions on some issues. It'd be curious to see if trade is one of them, since this poll suggests Trump's right with the public in both parties on trade. All right, if you're on Twitter, and we know you are, you probably haven't been able to avoid the slings and arrows between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz that have only escalated in the last 24 hours. It has gotten personal, even more personal. On the very off chance that you've missed what's happened over the past 24 hours, we're going to catch you up real quick.
Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, the wise. Here's what happened. A pro-Cruz super PAC used a naked photo of Melania Trump from a GQ photo shoot, saying, "Meet Melania Trump, your next first lady, or you could support Ted Cruz on Tuesday." Trump warned Cruz to be careful, or he'll spill the beans on Cruz's wife. Cruz wrote back, said the picture wasn't from him, and warned Trump, "If you try to attack Heidi, you're more of a coward than I thought." Hashtag classless. Oh, snap. Trump counters, lying Ted Cruz denied that he had anything to do with the GQ model photo post of Melania. That's why we call him Lying Ted. Oh, double snap. Cruz went on TV and lifted a line from the American president.
If Donald wants to get in a character fight, you want a character debate, he's better off sticking with me. You better stick with me, because Heidi is way out of his league. Because Sidney Ellen Wade is way out of your league.
Trump is on it. Lying Ted Cruz steals foreign policy from me and lines from Michael Douglas. Just another dishonest politician. Cruz challenges Trump to a debate, moderated by Bill O'Reilly. Trump tweets, "Make America Great Again." Cruz ties Trump to liberals like Clinton, Weiner, and Spitzer. Trump retweets Don Vito 08 with a picture of Heidi Cruz and Melania Trump. Holy moly. Cruz is ready. Donald, real men don't attack women. Your wife is lovely and Heidi is the love of my life. Trump makes a video of Cruz's endorsers saying mean things about Cruz. Cruz called Donald a sniveling coward and said leave Heidi the hell alone. Trump says make America great again. Again.
So some of that was from not the last 24 hours, but that brings us up to date on this battle. Who's winning? Cruz, Trump.
It would be hard to say that anyone is winning this ugly, pathetic, childish, unseemly back and forth between these candidates. But if one of them is losing more, it's Donald Trump, because it's Donald Trump who has a reputation and a history for not treating women very well, and this plays into that stereotype.
Maybe over the long term, but in the short term, in the fight between them, Trump is winning. It's crowding out any chance Ted Cruz has to make a substantive case against Trump. And I will say, as long as Trump can keep Cruz from having a single focus negative frame on him, I don't think Ted Cruz can stop Donald Trump. He needs one argument. And if he's arguing about their wives, that's not going to get him to be the nominee.
Donald Trump should be, at this point, looking towards the general election. And every time he does something like that, it builds the case that Democrats are going to make against him as a misogynist. And that's going to help Hillary Clinton beat him in the fall if he continues down this path.
As with so many things about Trump, when people say he's losing, he's helping himself for the nomination, he's hurting himself for the general, in the abstract, that may be true, but we don't know that. And people have predicted that Donald Trump is hurting himself. In general, he hasn't been.
Not a lot of women like this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah. All right. Time for a Merrick Garland update. Trying to up the Obama administration's pressure on Republicans today to force a vote on the president's Supreme Court nominee. Vice President Biden gave his speech in Washington at the Georgetown University Law Center, calling on Republican leaders to give President Obama's pick a fair hearing at all, really. Biden derided Capitol Hill gridlock over this issue and said a failure to vote on the nominee could risk a, quote, genuine constitutional crisis. Vice President also accused Republicans of mischaracterizing a speech he gave in 1992 about Supreme Court nominations made in a presidential election year.
Senate Majority Leader, and he's my friend, Mitch McConnell, and other Republicans today have been quoting selectively from the remarks that I made in an attempt to justify refusing Chief Judge Garland a fair hearing and a vote on the floor of the Senate. They completely ignore the fact that at the time, I was speaking of the dangers of nominating an extreme candidate without proper Senate consultation. They completely neglected to quote my unequivocal bottom line. So let me set the record straight, as they say. I said, and I quote, if the president consults and cooperates with the Senate, or moderates his selections, then his nominees may enjoy my support, as did Justice Kennedy and Justice Souter. End of quote.
So, John, the question is, the vice president made a valiant effort, but did he do anything to reset or alter the debate over the nomination of Merrick Garland?
That's how much he did to reset or alter the debate. I think the whole Biden thing is a huge distraction. It's one pretext, it's one argument Republicans have made, but the ultimate calculus that they're making has nothing to do with the Biden rule or the Biden prior speech or anything else. I think, that there are places where you can see that the pressure to give Garland a hearing is making some headway. This is not one of those moments, I don't think.
I continue to believe, I'll keep saying it, people might get bored, is all about the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chairman Grassley of Iowa. If he wants to hold a hearing, if he's feeling political pressure to do it, I think he can force Mitch McConnell to do it. I don't think this thing does anything to pressure Grassley. And to me, it is a one-senator game. They need a hearing, and the only way to get a hearing is for Grassley to feel it is a political imperative for him to hold a hearing.
I'll also point out that although we love Joe Biden, this argument that he made about what he said in the past was not compelling on its own.
As we say in Delaware, nice try.
Yeah, right.
Didn't quite work. All right, coming up, what do Wisconsin and New York have in common? The upcoming contests in both parties that we are watching very closely. We'll take a look at the political calendar in our near future, coming up after this word from our sponsors. Quote the poet, April is nigh, which means it's time to flip through our calendar cards and look at some of the upcoming presidential contests in both parties and review where we stand. First, on the Democratic side, there are 3 caucus states caucusing this Saturday: Alaska, Hawaii, and Washington State. Next up comes the primary in Wisconsin on April 5th. And then 2 weeks after that, on April 19th, is New York, followed by a whole bunch of northeastern and mid-Atlantic states voting on April 26th. That includes Connecticut, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island. John, what are you looking at in this Democratic calendar?
Well, what's the first thing to say, and the most important thing, is that 1, Alaska, 2, Hawaii, 3, Washington, Wisconsin, Wyoming, New York. 6 contests in a row. The next 6 in a row are all states that Bernie Sanders can, and in some cases should, win. And that will, but the question is by how much and what it does in terms of the pledged delegates. Hillary Clinton's lead is still formidable and daunting in that area, but if he wins 6 in a row, heading into that big delegate haul on April 26th, Bernie Sanders is going to have both. He's going to pick up some delegates, and he's going to have a huge wave of momentum at his back if he can go on that run.
And he proved this weekend, even though he did lose Arizona, he proved he could not only win states with the right circumstances, but win them big. I mean, he went overwhelming. So let's just look at this again. I think people assume he'll sweep on Saturday. He'll win those 3.
Yes.
Then Wisconsin is huge. Let's put a pin in that for a second. He'll win Wisconsin caucuses, Wyoming caucuses.
Right.
The key is
the 2 primaries.
The 2 primaries. Winning Wisconsin, which some people in Clinton world think could well happen. If he comes into New York, having won the next 5, and then beats her in her home state, which is not out of the question given the nature of the electorate.
Not at all.
If he does that, 5 in a row, 2 primaries, Wisconsin and New York, then he goes on to the 26th. With 5 northeastern states, with cash on hand, big crowds. I'm not saying he's then the nominee, but if he does 5 in a row and then wins 5 more in a row on the 26th and has won 10 in a row, that's not great for Hillary Clinton.
I'll tell you something.
It changes the race. It resets the race to some extent. She still has a big pledged delegate lead, but the super delegates in all these states then have to answer the question, how can you vote against the voters of your state?
And I'll say one thing that both the Clinton campaign and the Sanders campaign agree on, which is that New York is going to be in play. And people forget, it's been now a long time, 10 years since Hillary Clinton ran for the Senate in this state. Her connection to the voters here is not as strong as you would think a former U.S. Senator from New York would be.
Super key, step by step, he's got to win Wisconsin if he's going to put this thing back in Momentumville. All right, let's look at the Republican lineup. Lots of eyes on that Wisconsin April 5th Republican primary. That's next up for them in a little less than 2 weeks. Colorado has Republican caucuses on April 9th. But the real action occurs towards the end of the month. That's when New York holds It's non-winner take all. It's proportional primary on April 19th. A week later, like with the Democrats, voters go to the polls in Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island. So, John, in the Republican three-way race, what is key to look at in this calendar?
Well, we know there's going to be a Donnybrook in Wisconsin between all three candidates competing really hard.
All playing
very hard there for 2 weeks. That's not a must-win for John Kasich, but it's in the vicinity. Kasich either needs to win that race or show really, really strong, or the rationale for his continuing.
He's got to be a huge player in the state.
Right, and then you go to New York, which is again very similar in some ways to the Clinton-Sanders race. This is Donald Trump's home state. It's going to make for a combustible atmosphere here to have two contested primaries here with Hillary Clinton on one side, Donald Trump on the other. Is Trump loved in New York? Is he hated in New York? He's both. And that makes it not obvious, 100% obvious, that Donald Trump will win New York State.
If Trump wins Wisconsin and New York, forget the caucuses in Colorado. If he wins Wisconsin and New York, I think the race is over. I think there'll be pressure on Kasich to get out. I think there'll be pressure on Cruz to get out. And if he does win Wisconsin and New York, based on both momentum and the demographics of the state, I think he will sweep on April 26th. Now, in the normal physics of a Republican nomination contest, if he won Wisconsin, New York, and then, say, 4 out of 5 on the 26th, everybody'd be out of the race, everybody'd be endorsing him, everybody'd be turning his delegates over. The reality is, a lot of people in the party want this to go to that last day in June to make Trump earn a majority. And so the question to me is not, can he win those states, which is an open question, but if he wins those states, does he force those guys out of the race and sew up the nomination in April? Not mathematically, but like a normal nominee is declared the de facto nominee long before he actually has a majority.
Well, this is why the question of Kasich matters so much, because if Kasich can survive and continue to have a rationale through Wisconsin and New York, you get to these states, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, I actually think in a competitive three-way race, if he's really at par with the other two in terms of money and credibility, Kasich could win a lot of those states in a three-way race. It's not inconceivable. If he's out of the race, though, I think Trump versus Cruz, Trump will sweep those states on the 26th.
Trump and Cruz agree that Kasich has no chance to be the nominee. Trump and Kasich agree Cruz cannot compete in the Northeast. We'll see who's right. All right, up next, a deeper dive into the state that's shaping up to be a big, big battleground. Wisconsin, land of cheese and beer and bucks.
Beer.
After this.
Beer.
Emerson University poll out today. It shows Ted Cruz and Donald Trump locked in a battle for first amongst Wisconsin Republicans. Cruz gets 36% of Badger State GOPers. That puts him basically tied with Trump at 35. John Kasich trails in third at 19%. On the Democratic side, voters there preferred Hillary Clinton over Sanders, 50 to 44%. Here to talk us through his state that he knows well, Wisconsin, Craig Gilbert from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, who joins us from our Washington bureau. Craig, let's start with the Republican race. You've written about this, pretty fascinating. If you look at the demographics of Wisconsin, it should be a great Trump state. Why does he underperform there, at least in your polling and this poll, as compared to where he's done in other states?
Well, you know, his negatives have been really high in Wisconsin compared to other places. I think part of it may be cultural. I mean, he hasn't done great in the rest of the upper Midwest. He's obviously kind of a hard personality for some people to take. There's kind of a unique situation in southeastern Wisconsin, which is the reddest part of Wisconsin, the most Republican counties outside Milwaukee, and talk radio, conservative talk radio, is kind of lined up against Donald Trump in a way that you don't see nationally, you don't see in other parts of the country. It's very influential, and that happens to be the part of Wisconsin where he's doing the worst with Republican voters.
What do those local talk radio hosts say about him? What have they seized on to be so negative about him and very positive about Ted Cruz?
Pretty much everything. I mean, from his personality and his background and his history and his discourse to certainly they making an ideological argument. He's not a real conservative. And there, you know, there's a lot of sort of strategic and tactical arguments being made to Republican voters in Wisconsin right now. I mean, Kasich is making the argument that he's electable. Cruz and some of the Stop Trump people are making the argument that, you know, Cruz is the guy you have to vote for in order to stop Trump. That's certainly an argument you're going to hear on conservative talk radio.
And just quickly, because I want to move to the Democrats, is Kasich, you think, wise to play there? Can he win the state or make it a pure three-way?
I think it's tough. I mean, I would say he's got a shot in some of the congressional districts, like the Democratic congressional district in Milwaukee and the Democratic congressional district around Madison, where Republicans are more moderate. He's got a shot. I think it's difficult for him to win the state outright.
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, picking up a few delegates isn't really the game for him. He does need some wins, but you don't see that.
I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the state, but I think he's squeezed on both sides because Trump does well with rural voters and kind of blue-collar voters, and Cruz is making a big play for the more conservative sort of suburban vote in southeastern Wisconsin. So it's tricky for him. He's getting squeezed on both sides.
Yeah, okay. Let me move to the Democrats quickly. Hillary Clinton, this poll, the Emerson poll, has her leading by a little bit. It seems, though, like demographically, based on the fact that it's an open event, anybody can vote in either primary, it seems like it could be a very good state for Sanders.
It ought to be. I mean, when you think about the state's sort of history of voting, when you think about the fact that it's a pretty white state, it's almost 85 or 90% of the Democratic vote is going to be white on April 5th. And then the open primary is huge because obviously Sanders has been doing much better in other states and in the Wisconsin polling with independent voters than he's doing with partisan Democrats. So she's competitive and she'll do well in Milwaukee. Sanders will do really, really well in Madison. There'll be a battle for the rest of the state, but when you compare Wisconsin to other states that have already voted, it's a much friendlier place for him than most of the March states.
Yeah. What's the economy like there? How much negative, how much will Sanders maybe benefit from people being distressed on the Democratic side about the economy?
Well, I think he benefits both from some economic distress, particularly in certain parts of the state, but he's also going to benefit from political distress. I mean, potentially. I mean, Democrats are a very angry and frustrated group. They've been out of power. They've been powerless under Scott Walker now since 2011. A lot of bad things from their point of view have happened. I think in that climate, you can see Bernie Sanders' message resonating. Yeah.
Some states' endorsements matter more. You've got Scott Walker suggesting he's going to be for Ted Cruz. You've got Tammy Baldwin, the kind of leading Democratic voice in the state for Hillary Clinton. Do those endorsements or any others matter in that state?
I don't know that on the Republican side do they matter more than talk radio. On the Democratic side, Sanders doesn't really have the endorsements, but I don't know if that matters to his voters. I mean, the Republican establishment is interesting because it's the state of Scott Walker and Reince Priebus and Paul Ryan, who've all been kind of crossways with Donald Trump in one way or another. Right.
Okay. Craig Gilbert, thanks very much. Appreciate you coming in and talk about a big state. When we come back, the great Andrea Mitchell joins us here on set. We'll talk about the week, a big week in politics and foreign policy, right after this.
We would be willing to stand on a crowded rope line in the snow for hours just to ask one question of our next guest. Instead, somehow we tricked her into coming into our studio to talk about foreign policy and foreign policy politics, two topics that nobody knows better. She's NBC News' chief foreign affairs correspondent and MSNBC host, and she just got back from Cuba, where she was covering President Obama's trip. The great Andrea Mitchell
I would come
in the
here
house.
Any day to have that kind of introduction.
For most people now, it looks like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are going to be the nominees of their respective parties. In this week of big foreign policy stuff, some expected, some unexpected, talk about the way in which this provided a kind of preview of what a general election between those two might be like.
And if it's Ted Cruz, it's the same contrast, really, because what you have is Donald Trump and Ted Cruz seizing on the events in Brussels, renewing the Muslim ban, talking, Ted Cruz talking about surveillance of Muslim neighborhoods, Trump talking about pulling back from NATO, pulling back from European alliances, at the same time as you have Hillary Clinton at Stanford giving a very traditionally centrist, thoughtful, quote unquote, foreign policy speech about our need to help our allies, our need to help Europe, but Europe needs to do more itself, with specific examples about how we get flight manifests now from Europe. Since those, since Paris, actually, we get better flight manifests with regard to ISIS and all of the threats and the migration crisis. And the European countries, the European Union's 28 countries, cannot even share intelligence adequately or flight manifests with each other. So they need to cooperate better. So those were her pushes. And also, of course, she's now going after both Cruz and Trump, but particularly, of course, Donald Trump.
If you go up to 30,000 feet and look at Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State and now as a presidential candidate, are there elements of a Clinton doctrine of what Clinton foreign policy would be like as compared to the current president that are different?
Sure. More interventionist. She would have taken action in Syria if she had the moment in 2013, if she'd still been secretary with the red line, she would have been pushing as hard as John Kerry was pushing and as hard as the Pentagon was pushing.
That's a specific case, but can you take from that specific instance a doctrine? In other words, more interventionist in what kind of case or just in general?
Well, look at Libya. In fact, that was really a policy that has her fingerprints on it. And I'm not talking about Benghazi and all of the stuff that happened. I'm talking about the initial decision to go into Libya, to say that it was in our national interest to do that with our allies. At the time, we were hearing cries that they were leading from behind just because there were French and British planes up there, and we were not the only ones in the engagement.
I want to ask you specifically about Donald Trump. We interviewed Trump on Tuesday.
Right.
He said all the following things. He said he agreed with Ted Cruz about sending police patrols into Muslim neighborhoods in America. He said he thought that NATO might be obsolete. He wouldn't take off the table using nuclear weapons against ISIS. And he said that one of the chief attributes he would bring as a foreign policy or national security president was unpredictability. People should not know what a president's going to do next. That's a good thing in world affairs, according to Donald Trump. His image as a strong man has played to his advantage in the Republican nomination fight. Can it play as an advantage for him in a general election? Well,
here's the deal. According to all the polling, all the exit polling, terrorism after San Bernardino was the #1 issue among Republican primary voters and Republican leaders. And, by I think 2-1 over Democratic voters. The economy and jobs was the #1 issue with Democratic voters. And that was the high point in December, our December NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. Terrorism is a potent issue, a wedge issue now with Republican voters. It depends on what is happening in the fall if they are the nominees of the party. I really think that if there is some action like San Bernardino at home or something like Paris or Brussels in the weeks right up before the election, it really plays to the strongman image, the Donald Trump projection of strength. And I think it hurts Hillary Clinton. I think she's got some vulnerabilities on foreign policy. As much as she understands the connections and has all of the language and really has a deep knowledge of it, she can be criticized for Libya now, for the Middle East, for not doing enough in the Middle East, for going only once to Iraq. She really was hands off. That was Joe Biden's account. One Saturday we went to Iraq just for half a day, really. That's the only time she was ever in Iraq. So whatever is failing in Afghanistan or Iraq can be laid to her feet as much as to Barack Obama's feet politically. I'm not saying it's fair, but I'm just saying that that's what the Republican candidate would do.
Amongst the many things you do is cover Hillary Clinton, and you hear her a lot. When I hear her, she doesn't talk very much about her record as Secretary of State out on the stump. It's not a centerpiece of this campaign. If it's Trump versus Clinton, do you think that's likely to change? Do you think she will move towards talking about,
yes,
I was America's chief diplomat and therefore I'm more qualified than this businessman reality show star?
She's done 2 national security speeches in 2 days.
Right.
And that's what she talked about in Miami when we were all there last week, when she was celebrating her victory in Florida. She talked about Donald Trump and talking tough is not smart, going after Muslims is not smart. This doesn't show strength. It shows that you're inexperienced. Also, Ted Cruz. She was really going after them on all of those issues.
Your sense is that if it is a Clinton versus Trump general election, she will, as she's done in the last week or so, elevate her resume and her positions on national security as part of the contrast, as compared to other issues.
Absolutely, and try to show the contrast. I'm the grown-up in the room. I have the experience. You can't trust him because he is so erratic. I mean, that's going to be her take. And I think it plays to her strengths. She's not the best retail candidate. She would be the first one to say it. She's trying to make a virtue of the fact, well, unlike my husband and unlike Barack Obama, that's not what I do well. Right. I am the serious, studious person who knows her stuff. That's what she's trying to portray.
You know, one of the things that President Obama, who you were with this week, was criticized for was the way he behaved in Cuba, not just going to the baseball game, but with the sunglasses and the ESPN interview and doing the wave, all that stuff. Then he goes to South America and they got the tango thing, right? Even among a lot of Democrats, and not just totally establishment Democrats, there were a lot of people who were like, look, the optics here are really terrible. So my question about that is that the kind of thing that either now or soon or eventually that Hillary Clinton will find herself criticizing President Obama for as she tries to get a little distance from him to make herself less vulnerable in the way you were suggesting before to attacks from Donald Trump?
I don't think she'll criticize him on something that is, you know, the optics, the photo op. I think she will and already has on the trade deals. She's separated herself completely from him on the trade deals, even though she supported them. And so she'll find other issues, economic issues, which are the issues that white, you know, male voters care about, because now she's really got to worry about possible crossover votes. I mean, if you're running against Donald Trump, his appeal could be in Ohio and Michigan and even Pennsylvania. And that's, you know, that's where she would be vulnerable against a Donald Trump. You know, knowing I was coming over here, I checked again with the White House in Argentina, and they said there is no one in that White House, and certainly not the president, who is second-guessing this. As much as a lot of us, even watching the baseball game, look, it was a huge hit there. I mean, Raul Castro went with them to the airport, saw them off. I mean, it was Dave Winfield and Derek Jeter and Joe Torre and Jackie Robinson, Rachel Robinson. You know, Jackie Robinson played there in 1947. I'm a crazy baseball fan. Right. I loved watching it, but I also thought there's a way to do it without the sunglasses and chewing gum and, you know, slapping everybody on the back. But the crowd just ate it up. And similarly, they said, this is a new Argentinian leader. We are planting our flag in Latin America. We've ignored it for too long. We are declassifying the CIA's bad deeds during the Dirty War on the 40th anniversary of the military coup. And we're really making friends in an important continent.
It takes a tango.
Yeah.
And the tango. I still want to know whether he really practiced that and knew it was coming. They say he did not.
Thanks, Andrea. Come back anytime, please, soon. Soon. Up next, what it's like to have your court nomination blocked by the United States Senate. We'll hear about one man's experience from more than 10 years ago next. And if you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can now listen to us as well on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM.
Back in 2003, after 2 years of very partisan gridlock, Miguel Estrada, a Bush 43 nominee to be on the D.C. Court of Appeals, withdrew his name from consideration following a filibuster by Senate Democrats. Yesterday, Estrada spoke with Bloomberg View columnist Al Hunt in Washington about President Obama's Supreme Court pick, who faces similar opposition right now.
I don't think anybody has any doubt about Judge Garland's qualifications. I think he's very well thought of on both sides of the aisle, and everybody is pretty much unanimous that by dint of temperament, experience, intelligence, background, he is a very suitable person for the Supreme Court. The argument about the vacancy really is entirely political. It is whether the Republicans in the Senate are willing to accept somebody who may be a centrist Democrat instead of basically spinning the wheel on the election in the hope that they can get somebody who's qualified, to be sure, but more on the right of center side.
Well, let me ask you this. What considerations are legit here? You also supported Elena Kagan while noting your strong differences with her on some issues. Is ideology ever a legitimate factor in considering? Obviously, you consider competence, but what else?
Well, I think it's entirely up to the Senate. One of the dispiriting aspects of these arguments, which we tend to have every few years, is that both parties purport to appeal to principle, and both parties purport to give lip service to the supremacy of merit and qualifications, but neither party really is willing to accept the qualified people from the other party. We saw this when Judge Alito was up in 2005. He was at the time as qualified as Judge Garland is today. He was one of the leading judges in the country by temperament, experience, etc. There were 25 Democrats who voted not to give him a vote. I find it not necessarily constructive to dwell on the past, except to ascertain that the fight here is political, and everybody is appealing to the political base of their respective parties. That's appropriate, but I think even within the political considerations, there are a lot of people in this country who go to work every day, who tell their children that merit really matters in this country, and they really want to strive for a society in which we come to recognize people who have merit.
But would you acknowledge that if he should be confirmed, that Judge Garland would move the court to the center left, and might even replace your old boss, Justice Kennedy, as the swing vote?
Perhaps. I think all of these things will be appropriately explored at a hearing. It is very difficult to say things in a very general way, because even Justice Scalia, who was viewed as somebody who was on the right of the court, was one of the leading lights of a revolution in constitutional law that gave us a lot of constitutional law favorable to criminal defendants. Now, people don't focus on that. People don't know it. But he was on the side of criminal defendants in Confrontation Clause cases, in due process cases, in Fourth Amendment cases, and also on the First Amendment. And so he was somebody who was distinctly liberal in his votes in a number of things. And one of the things I think people misapprehend about the court is that although people may come with different philosophies, they come to try to judge on the merits.
But wouldn't you bet, I mean, on issues like affirmative action and voting rights, executive authority, that certainly the court would be more likely to be sympathetic to the what might be termed liberal point of view with Judge Garland than it would have been with Justice Scalia?
I would expect that's likely, and I probably would not go down the road of giving you examples, but I think Justice Scalia was such a unique figure in the history of the court that I could probably name, I won't, but I probably could name several Republican appointees to federal courts of appeals who were appointed by George W. Bush, who, if appointed by President Obama, also could be said to move the court to the left. You have to take each of these seats and really not ask, how are my issues going to turn out on the basis of this appointment, but whether this is a forthright person who will bring intellect and principle to each case. I think he's a very moderate person, and he is an incrementalist. I would not expect Judge Garland to get on the Supreme Court of the United States and take a hatchet to relatively recent binding case law. These things, again, can be explored at a hearing, but these are things that we should ask our nominees. We want them to be faithful to case law and precedent, but we cannot assume a priori that they will come in with a wrecking ball. I may not agree with all of them all of the time, but I think the popular conceptions that our judges are essentially politicians in robes is misguided, and that we do little to enhance the legitimacy of our justice by contributing to it by seeing everything in left-right terms.
Miguel, let me ask you this. How do you think it's going to play out? Will Judge Garland be on the Supreme Court by the end of the year or not?
I think so.
You do?
I do.
And would you guess that will happen in a lame duck session because the Republicans have kind of got themselves out on a limb before the election?
Perhaps. I think once we see how the election is shaping up and whether the Republican Party believes it has a candidate that is likely to win in November, you may see change in the attitude of some of the Republicans in the Senate. If it's really clear that we're going to have a disputed convention and that the opposition to even considering a nominee could affect some of the races in the Senate, it may be that the political calculus will change. I imagine that there are some people running in some states who are going to have to persuade their voters that not giving even a hearing to somebody of this quality is good policy.
Our thanks to Miguel Estrada and to Al Hunt. Up next, we head to the movies for some real political thrillers when we come back. Now it's time for our By the Numbers block. We're going to the box office with Ann Selzer. She is our movie critic / crackerjack pollster, and she joins us from Johnston, Iowa, to give her reviews of some of the hot films of the season. Ann, thank you for lending your keen eye. We hear you've got a review of Trumptopia. It's a flick about Republican voters, both past and future, based on true events depicted in our new Bloomberg Politics national poll. What does Trumptopia refer to? What does that tell us?
Well, what it tells us is we took a look in our poll of the people who had either already participated in the nominating contest on the Republican side, because we're in the thick of it, and people who expect to in the future. Well, what happens when we sort of divide those up? What can that tell us about the future? It's our own little crystal ball. And what you see for Donald Trump is that he's not only won the plurality of support from people who've already voted, that number gets even bigger among people who expect to vote in the future. So anybody looking for Trump to fade, we have no data that would suggest that's going to happen anytime soon.
It suggests his future looks brighter than even his past. All right, Ann, you also saw the hit movie Deadpool. This is the one about Hillary Clinton's trouble when it comes to a specific nemesis. That's Ohio Governor John Kasich. What challenges does Clinton face if she faces Kasich in the general?
Yeah. Well, you know, we did general election matchups. So these are people likely to vote in November. And who are they supporting? In the case, it's Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton wins. Hillary Clinton versus Ted Cruz. Hillary Clinton wins. Oh, Hillary Clinton, John Kasich. John Kasich wins. So you keep hearing him say, people, you know, I'm the only one who can beat Hillary Clinton, and these numbers bear that out. We went looking for, well, how did he do that? And those are the numbers you're seeing on your chart. He wins majorities, and in some cases, substantial majorities, with some key groups. He beats her with married parents. He beats her with whites, among Catholics, and among men. So he's put together a broad spectrum of constituencies that you need if you're going to beat Hillary Clinton if she is the nominee on her side.
All right, and finally, one more blockbuster that I think gives us some insight into Kasich versus Clinton. It's called Clinton Has Fallen. Plot's kind of confusing, so walk us through it without any spoilers.
It is. Okay, well, this is about party stickiness. And so what we did was to look at the people in the Sanders, let's start with Kasich matchup, and say, okay, I vote for Bernie Sanders. Well, what do those people do if it turns out it's Hillary Clinton versus John Kasich? 19% of those Sanders supporters defect to John Kasich. So same situation with Cruz. They voted for Hillary for Bernie Sanders. Well, 11% go to Cruz. The smallest number of defectors go to Donald Trump. So people keep saying there's this unity, there's something alike between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And in fact, our data say quite the opposite, that Bernie Sanders supporters are least likely to defect to Donald Trump in the case that their guy, Bernie Sanders, does not turn out to be the nominee.
And again, just 15 seconds left. Fully a fifth of people who are voting for Sanders say, in a general, they'd vote for Kasich over Clinton. That's a big number, 1/5.
That's a big number, and the thing is that Bernie Sanders would have to win the nomination.
Yep.
I'm sorry, that John Kasich would have to win the nomination, and that's step one.
Yep. Ann, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Like going to the film cinema with you. We'll be right back with Who Won the Day. the immortal words of John McLaughlin, quickly, who won the day?
Sadly, the same guy won today as who won the day yesterday. Yesterday, he took Fife Dog, Joe Garagiola, and Ken Howard. Today, Gary Shandling, the winner of the day, the Grim Reaper.
All right. Before we go, we would be remiss to take a moment to remember, in a more dignified way, the great Gary Shandling. The actor and comedian died today at the age of 66, a pioneer and a star of the great Larry Sanders Show and its Gary Shandling Show. He inspired a generation of comics, and he will be missed. Bloomberg Politics is all the latest news anytime on the web. Up next, Bloomberg West. Until Monday, thanks for watching. Sayonara.